PASA's latest webinar. This one is about our accreditation process. So you'll have seen lots of news about accreditation and the quality of administration, and that's what we're here to champion. And you'll have seen that the regulator has recently, with its new revised code, it is focusing on the quality of administration as well. So a timely webinar to talk about how going through PASA's accreditation can help towards that. I'll be joined over the course of the next hour by a great panel for you. We're going to start with Lorraine, who is on our accreditation committee, and she's going to walk you through how it works. Also joined by Angela from RSM, and RSM are our partners for actually doing the verification of your performance against our standards, and takes you through that process. And then for the second half of our webinar, we're going to talk to two of our accredited pension administration teams, mixing it up a little bit. We've got one from the private sector, one from the public sector, and also TPA versus in-house. So lots of different viewpoints to get across to you, and you can see what resonates with you. But with no further ado, I'm going to invite Lorraine onto camera, and we're going to start off talking about how it all works.
Thank you very much, Chris. Kelly, would you like to move on a bit? On to the next one. Thank you. So as Chris mentioned, I'm Lorraine Harper and I chair the Accreditation Committee of PASA. The committee's role is to oversee the whole process of accreditation and manage the relationship with our independent accrediting assessor, which is RSM. But first of all, just to add a bit of context here to remind you what the standards cover. There are 11 separate standards against which we assess each organisation that applies for accreditation, and they broadly fall into 4 categories. Service management, which looks at the governance and accountability of a pensions administration service. Process and control delves deeper into how things are actually done, delivered and controlled. And then, of course, a big area is data and quality. So we're looking at security. We're also looking at the integrity of data as well. And then finally, people and development. So we're looking at who's delivering the service, how are their competencies kept up to date, how are they developed in that role. The standards are regularly reviewed, and they're reviewed against things like the guidance that PASA issues from time to time, against regulation, particularly when there's a change. And we also compare with industry good practice. So what are people across the industry doing, and what do we need to look at there? And finally, we look at feedback from organisations. We're very keen to get feedback so that we can continually improve the standards and the assessment process. And so those are the main areas that we look at. Before I go into a little bit more detail, it's worth having a look at the advantages of accreditation. It is generally regarded across the industry that PASA accreditation is the gold standard because it is specific to pensions administration, unlike other accreditations that are more general in nature. It focuses purely on the delivery of pensions administration services. Also, the standards have been assessed against the Pensions Regulators General Code, and they have been updated in order to ensure that they are covered in our standards and also in the accreditation process as a result, so that organisations that achieve the accreditation can be confident that they are covering all those elements of the General Code that affect pensions administration. And as part of the accreditation process, we make recommendations or suggestions to organisations on how they might improve things. We recognise that there's no one way to deliver a pension service. There are lots of different ways, but there are also ways that improvements can be made across all organisations. Nobody's perfect, so we do that as part of the process. And organisations that have achieved the accreditation generally feel it gives them some competitive advantage, and particularly in relation to outsourced services, for example. But finally, I would say that one of the real advantages of accreditation for organisations that go through the process is that staff really take some pride in this. They feel good about it because they are directly involved in the process, and the assessment actually covers staff and what they do and how they do it and how they keep up to date with things. But I'd also add to this that organisations that do go through accreditation are really formally committing to quality and continuous improvement, because the accreditation happens again every 3 years, at least every 3 years. And so it is a commitment to quality. If you'd like to move on, thanks. Just to give you an overview of the process, if an organisation is interested in accreditation, the first thing we usually do is invite them to have a sort of general non-committal discussion. So that's usually either myself or someone from the committee and a representative from RSM will get together with people from a particular applicant organisation, and we will have a general chat explaining how everything works, but more importantly gives them the opportunity to ask as many questions as they would like. And at the end of that initial meeting, usually we share a questionnaire with the organisation so they can go away and think about it. If they want to start the process, they may need to go away and mobilise a project team internally, comprising some subject matter experts in the various aspects of the accreditation process. And they also get a copy of a non-disclosure agreement, and that's between RSM and the applicant organisation. It's really at this point that the committee steps away from the process. We don't get involved in the actual assessment process. We leave that to RSM. In a moment, I'm going to ask a colleague from RSM to go through and explain how the process works. But I wanted to assure everyone that the committee itself doesn't see that detail, so we don't need to be part of the NDA at all. We get a report at the end. So at this point in time, I'd quite like to hand over to Angela Taylor of RSM, and she's going to just run you through what happens. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks, Lorraine. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Taylor. I'm an Associate Director with RSM, and I've been involved in this process now for around 9 years. So a lot of organisations that have come through the process I will have spoken to. So further to Lorraine's update in terms of the actual first meeting that we have, we will discuss the process in more detail. So essentially what I'm going to say now will be on individual calls with organisations. And what we do is then we inquire, how many locations there are and how many employees who are involved with the accreditation, not the accreditation, sorry, with the administration side of things. And that helps us form a decision regarding cost, which we can come back to later. Once that's happened, we send out the questionnaire and the NDA, as Lorraine mentioned, and then what we do is we get a sort of timings from yourselves to try and understand when you feel that you will be ready to embark on the process. Once that's been discussed, we can then put in rough timings for that, and then agree when you feel that you will be ready to submit the responses to the questionnaire. What we then ask for is the questionnaire responses and the supporting evidence. When we say supporting evidence at this stage for the desktop review, it is example evidence. We don't do the sample testing until we come round to the fieldwork side of things. So the desktop review involves us taking the questionnaire responses and making sure that what you have provided meets that response. We ask for quite detailed responses because the more information that we are given, the better, really, because that stops us having to ask more questions. Once we've gone through that process, if we feel that yes, everything's good, the responses are great and the supporting evidence matches what is being said, and it looks as though that at face value that you're meeting the standard, we then arrange the fieldwork side of things. The fieldwork involves selecting samples. We request populations, we then select samples, and we agree the timings for that up front as well. That's usually around 2 weeks after we've completed the desktop review, and we would ask for the documentation to be provided in advance wherever possible so that we can hit the ground running, so to speak. We can also do observations because there are some areas that some organisations feel are too sensitive to share, and we do that by doing site visits. So the site visits are also agreed. So if you have multiple locations on your first accreditation, we would visit every single site, and that's usually a day per site, and that's just to have conversations, etc., with any walkthroughs that we need to do, and also, which is quite a different element of our reviews, is that we have one-to-one sessions with employees that are involved in the administration process. The one-to-ones are generally just a set of questions that we've asked for answers. We ask for answers to. There are no tricks in those questions. They are straightforward. And we always ask that the organisation communicates to the employees that we've selected for those one-to-one conversations to let them know there's nothing to worry about. There isn't any traps there. It is literally just us trying to understand what it is that they do and how it benefits members. Once we have gone through that process, we then take everything away, complete our review, and then we write our report to PASA. Our report goes directly to PASA, but they don't see any of the testing that we do. It is literally a summary. If we get to the end of the desktop review and we feel that actually to go through the process any further would not be beneficial, we stop the process there. And it's not stop, it's more of a stall of the process. And that gives you the opportunity to go away and fix whatever needs to be fixed or improve whatever needs to be fixed, and then come back and restart the process. If it's a reasonable time frame, it's not so much a restart, we continue the process. If the time frame is slightly longer, we would then probably need to restart the whole process. I think it's critical to add at this stage, no one fails. So that's why we do these two phased approaches. Once we've completed our report, this then goes to PASA, as I've said previously, and PASA then communicate the results to you directly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. Yes, I'd just like to reiterate that point. PASA doesn't fail anyone who goes through this process. We don't exist for that reason. We exist to raise standards in pensions administration. That's what we focus on. So if for any reason we don't think that an organisation is going to meet the standards, they get a chance to go away and make some improvements and come back. The report that comes from RSM is reviewed by the committee. We sometimes have to go back and ask for clarity on a few points or other sorts of questions before we then put together a higher level summary report for each organisation, which basically sets out the 11 standards and shows whether it's a straight pass for each standard or it's a pass with improvement. If it's a pass with improvement, we set out suggestions for how improvements might be made, why we're making those suggestions. And we expect that when an organisation comes back for re-accreditation, usually in about 3 years, they will have made some of those improvements. So the report goes out directly to the organisation from PASA, from the committee, and subsequently the central PASA administrative function will issue a certificate of accreditation, which can be shared with anyone you want. And ultimately you also get a trophy, and you will get support for things like public relations activities as well. The accreditation lasts for 3 years, assuming that in the interim years you have completed something called annual certification. This is a very simple, straightforward process where you are asked to answer 5 very straightforward questions and sign your submission. And that's basically confirming that nothing in your organisation or the way you deliver the service has changed that might affect your accredited status. Sometimes organisations might go through major mergers, and therefore there'll be quite a lot of change happening that may trigger re-accreditation earlier than 3 years, or maybe you've completely replaced your pensions administration system, and the way you deliver the service as a result of that, that could also trigger re-accreditation earlier than 3 years. But generally speaking, most organisations go the full 3 years. There is a cost to accreditation, and that varies according to organisations who apply. So, and it's based on the number of sites from which you deliver the services and the number of staff involved. So it's very much on a case-by-case basis, and we can provide that information after the initial discussion I mentioned earlier. So in a nutshell, that's a bit of a run through the whole process. I want to pick up Chris now. Thank you.
So that's fine. I forgot, because I always forget something at the start of this webinar, is that you can raise your own questions. So somewhere in the webinar panel, you should be able to ask our panel any questions you want to pick up later. But for now, if I could clarify a couple of things from Lorraine and Angela before we move on to our case studies. Angela, you used the word population when you were talking about your site visits. I wonder if you could just explain, because I'm sure a lot of us who work in admin think about membership as our population. So what do you think about when you think about populations?
So what we do is we look at a period of time. So for example, if we were looking at 2025, we would look at the period, say, from the 1st of January to present day. And we would ask for a listing of clients or customers, not members. It is like the employers as opposed to the actual members themselves. And then we would, from that listing, we would then take a sample. So it's probably easier to say we ask for lists as opposed to populations. Sorry, that's very much audit speak. I do apologise.
That's okay. Lorraine, when we get the report back, what do you find from your experience are the things that people sometimes trip over?
Yeah, there are sort of 3 or 4 main areas where which organisations find perhaps more challenging than others. The first is the reporting, where we often find that the administration reports are not as comprehensive as the standards like them to be, and we feel that, you know, if you're delivering an administration report regularly to a trustee body or a governance committee or something like that, it's good to have things in one place rather than broken up into lots of different documents. In particular, trustee boards, a lot of the members have day jobs, and so it's important that they get all the information they need for good governance in one place. So that's one area. Another area is the competencies. So being able to demonstrate that the staff delivering the service are assessed on a regular basis, and they have proper development programs in place to make sure they're always up to date and always able to do the job that they're required to do. that can be challenging for some organisations. And then another area is in relation to feedback. We like to see that members of pension schemes and clients and trustees and governance committees as well have access to giving the administration service feedback in whatever way they interact. So if it's a member of a pension scheme, they might use a telephone, they might use email, they might use a portal, but they need to be able to give feedback. And then what do organisations do with that feedback? Do they use it to help them improve the services? And if so, how can they evidence that? So that's another. They're the three main areas, I think, where organisations find the biggest challenges.
Thank you. Just already a couple of questions from the audience, so thank you for being interactive with us. Keep them coming. First question, the answer is yes. I know the answer to that one. We are recording this. Second question, I'll spread out a little bit, but Sharon asks, being a DC only administrator, does the process accommodate / reflect that? Perhaps I can also broaden that out. Are there anything about the process that differs between in-house, TPA, insurers, all of that sort of thing?
Okay, the standards are the same for everyone, no matter who you are, how you deliver the service. The standards are the same. They are what we expect organisations to aspire to. We recognise that there are differences between different types of scheme. There are differences between defined benefit, defined contribution, hybrid, buyout providers and the way they do things. There are differences, and we know that there are lots of different ways to achieve the same outcomes, but it's the outcomes we're focused on. So yes, in an assessment for a scheme or an organisation that only provides DC services, we would focus on those services. They wouldn't be assessed against something that's not relevant to them, but the standards do cover all types of scheme.
Thank you very much. Before we go on to our second half and go into some case studies, I think we've just answered one of the questions. Kriti, thanks for your questions. Maybe we've just covered the second one. The other one, for site visits, Angela, how do you deal with international or outsourced sites?
So we do have resources in a lot of countries, so it would depend on where that international site is. If not, we can use Teams. The one-to-one conversations can be held quite well over Teams. We did it during COVID, so we carried on the process during COVID, and a lot of that was over Teams or whatever platform is used. So it is not a block to doing this process at all.
Right, I think in the interest of time, I'll let you two ladies have a brief pause. We'll get you back for the Q&As at the end. But second half of our webinar today is to talk to two of our accredited administration teams. So please welcome on the screen Mary from XPS. And unfortunately, I can't welcome on screen Amy from West Mids LGPS because her camera's not working, which is our loss. But I can assure you she is on the line. So you'll hear a disembodied voice in a moment. But we're going to start off with Mary. Sorry, Kelly, on the slides. You can hide the slides now if we're done with those. So Mary, I'll hand over to you, and we'll take your view of your experience of going through this process.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, I'm Mary McLeod. I'm a partner at XPS, and I was part of the PASA Accreditation team. So to talk about how this accreditation worked for us and what the process was like, I break it down into a few questions. Firstly, why PASA accreditation? What was it like for us as a company? What we learned from the experience, how we benefited, and what it meant for us next. So firstly, why a PASA accreditation? Here at XPS, we believe in really high quality. So we've always been guided by the frameworks of PASA, and we felt it was about time we actually went through and went through the process and actually got the accreditation. We felt it showed our commitment to quality. It helped support our members, the staff, and also the clients themselves. helped us be part of the industry upholding good administration standards, and also the values of PASA are very much aligned with ours as a company as well. As a company, we also believe in continual improvement. So as Lorraine's touched on, the annual reassessment plus the reaccreditation every 3 years, make sure we're always looking for how we could better improve ourselves. And lastly, we market our services for a third-party administration provider, and PASA accreditation is valued by the industry. So we believed we were more likely to be shortlisted for tenders and also asked to tender as a result. So what was the process like for us? We put forward a business case for it, all of the reasons that I've just detailed above, but also we felt that this accreditation was a purely administration accreditation, whereas a lot of the other accreditations we go through are more audit driven, more looking at processes and procedures rather than particularly outcomes for members. We had an expectations conversation that Lorraine's touched on about what it meant, what our company did, some examples of what we did just to make sure we were on the right framework. As I said, we already do ISO, IAAF and investors in people, so we do have processes and procedures in place. There's quite a lot of synergy between the standards, so it wasn't a huge job like we were worried it would be. We also found the standards were clear and easy to understand. They're not written in a lot of jargon. Definitely meets the requirements of PASA, being clear and straightforward. So what we did as a group was we carved up the standards between our SMEs and we gathered evidence of where we felt we met those standards. We also spoke to the PASA team, so Lucy and Lorraine, they listened to some of our ideas and supported us where we were unclear on things. And as I mentioned, there was an audit, so Angela visited our offices. Similar to other audits that we go through, people come on site. There were a few locations that were chosen, come in, look at processes, procedures, and speak to members of staff. We all felt very supported. The staff didn't feel they were interrogated, so it's all a really good process for us. Again, we have investors in people, so our staff are used to talking to people come in and ask them about their process procedures, and I think they actually like to talk about how they get to develop. It's more about them and their careers than it is about, you know, just how we do this and how we do that. So they were quite happy to talk to people. As I said, it wasn't a huge test. There weren't PASA and PASA standards that we had to get through that we didn't quite understand and not get the meaning forward. It was a lot of work that we do. It was just making sure we had that documentation and that evidence in place. So what did we learn from the accreditation process? Well, we got our findings report, as Lorraine touched on. It told us what we do well and what we could improve on a little bit more. As I said, continuous improvement, that really helps us as a business. We got advice and support. It wasn't just about meeting the standards. It was about how we could exceed, how we could do better, what other things we could put in place to build a really strong service. It wasn't passing or failing. We didn't ever feel at the end of the process we were going to be told we hadn't passed. We did feel encouraged. We did feel supported. We did find out early on in the process where we might not have enough evidence, so we worked hard at making sure that there were evidence to prove those areas. So it was very much a team effort to talk about things and getting us through. At the end of the day, PASA help us to be better at what we do. They listened to us. They looked at our ideas. They provided feedback. And shared their own insights as well from across the industry. And I feel like we genuinely have produced something better together. What was the benefit? Well, we achieved our objectives. We did everything we set out to do with a PASA accreditation. We felt it was an independent review of our processes and how we do our work. So that's always helpful to get. We felt like the audit wasn't just about standards, it was about concentrating on good outcomes, which again is really important to us. And all of our staff were really happy to have another accreditation under their belt, which is always a good thing. We also found we did get shortlisted into more tender documents. So we were right that the industry does value the accreditation. So what's next for here at XPS? Well, we are preparing for our reaccreditation. It's been 3 years already, what a whiz. So we've been gathering evidence and sharing what we've done. As Lorraine pointed out, we do review annually, so we do get together regularly throughout the 3-year period just to make sure that we're not completely off track, to talk about new things that we're building in, to talk about any new standards that have come in, so that we're fully prepared for our reaccreditation when it comes through. And we're arranging site visits and audits and all of those things at the moment. that is all from me at the moment.
Thanks, Mary. Brief delay when my camera warms up again. If you don't mind me just asking one quick question, Mary, before we move on to Amy. You mentioned already that you have a lot of other certifications, so a lot of the raw materials, shall we say, you probably had in place before you started this process. And we've also already heard from Lorraine earlier that this is very pension admin specific when those others aren't. Is that what you found? Did you find there was still a bit extra that you needed to do for PASA accreditation? I'll mute again.
I think it was just making sure that the evidence we had met the standards. So some of the other accreditations we do, it's about the fact that it's done, whereas this is what is the impact. So especially around the membership feedback thing, we do get membership feedback, but it was about making sure that there was evidence of what we do with that and how we deal with that. So it was more about making sure we had the right sort of evidence rather than we were just ticking a box.
Maybe we'll stay on camera, Mary, given that otherwise we'll have a very blank screen when Amy joins us. Exactly. We will cheer Amy on from a distance, not just yet, Kelly. Thanks. So, Amy, do you want to give us the view from your in-house administration team?
Hi, yeah, and apologies about my camera. I can't see anybody either. So okay. It's quite strange just talking to a blank screen, but I will continue anyway. So, I mean, the reason for us why we went with PASA accreditation was assurance. That was a key driver for us. We feel it provides us with that independent assurance to our stakeholders, not only our governing bodies, our pensions committee and pensions board, but also other compliance organisations like TPR and our external internal audit functions as well. So we are a local government in-house administrator, and we did look at other options around ISO accreditations and AAF, but we didn't feel they were as relevant to us and that they were quite large scale. Whereas PASA really does focus on, you know, the core function that we are here to deliver around pension administration. And for us, it also shows that we provide a good level of service, not only to our customers, but also to our people. So we do have, similar to Mary, we have customer service in excellence and gold in investors and people. And what we found was that PASA really brings these two things together, you know, and it supports us in achieving some of our corporate core values of being a learning leader and also making sure that we deliver valued outcomes, because it is that focused on outcomes itself. So going forward for us as well, though, we are anticipating that having this accreditation will support us with the upcoming independent governance review for local government funds. We'll be able to then clearly demonstrate we work to best practice and also to a very high gold standard as well. Another key point for us, though, around why we undertook it was around recruitment. I think we all know that it's a very competitive market for experienced pension administration professionals, and there's quite a finite resource that all of us are targeting across the industry. So this accreditation shows to prospective employers and the organisation's commitment to best practice and our focus on customers and our employees as well. And we have had instances at interview where members have asked us about it and inquired about it a little bit further. So it is something that does stand out to us as well as an organisation looking to recruit. We actually started our journey back in late 2019, early 2020. And at this time, there was only one other local government fund who were based in Scotland who were accredited with PASA. But similar to Mary, our approach was looking at getting SMEs together into a working group and undertaking a bit of a gap analysis of the areas we think we needed to improve, and then actually identifying and building a plan out of how we were going to fill any gaps that we did identify. Throughout that process, from our early engagement with PASA, we found them really supportive. You know, they were there to help in terms of assurance on were we interpreting the standard correctly as well, and support us through that. It probably took us all in all about 12 months to prepare and go through the accreditation process. And at the end, we actually became the first LGPS fund in England and Wales to be accredited. So we've now actually gone through our annual certification process and also gone through one accreditation process as well. So we're kind of very much further on in our journey with PASA again. But a key thing for us that's helped us with that journey is embedding PASA as part of our BAU activities. So it's doing regular checks to make sure that we're still got the evidence there that we do need to support our accreditation as well, and building it into our BAU activities going forward. We also learned a lot about ourselves going through this process. One thing that we did find out was that we're actually quite good at following the standard in the majority of areas. We were doing a lot of things there and had the evidence there, but there were some areas that could we actually evidence we were doing it? We were doing the activity, but could we actually prove we were doing it and evidence that? So, for example, an example of this for us was process manuals for staff. We had them in place for all of our key processes, and they were reviewed regularly by the teams, but we didn't actually have the evidence of the activity undertaking being taken. So a simple change that we did, a quick fix, was just actually creating a log where we now actually regularly monitor and record that work of where we do undertake reviewing and updating process manuals on there. And that has also then given us wider benefits in terms of for our internal teams, for them to see what else is happening outside of their own kind of processes and manuals as well. Lorraine touched on one area that funds tend to struggle on, which was around the feedback element and reporting. We actually did quite a majority of these requirements. However, going through the accreditation process, we actually enabled us to increase the priority of implementing a more structured approach to some of this feedback. So particularly around our post-process surveys with our members, we did it, but we did it probably more ad hoc than we would like, something that was on our agenda to do, but going through this accreditation process enabled us to bring that up into the priority list and get a more structured approach to how we did do that. But finally, kind of one area that we did actually find more difficult was section 1, the agreement section. So being a public sector statutory scheme that is administered in-house, we do differ quite significantly to a TPA, and we needed to really kind of translate our world of governance to that standard. So, for example, we provided evidence around our local authority constitution, our external and internal governance structures that we had in place to demonstrate how we met those agreement standards. Some of the supporting documentation that we provided includes our pension administration strategy, which again sets out our responsibilities for the fund and also our participating employees as well. But again, PASA and RSM were both really supported through that process as we talked them through what we were thinking, our understanding, to make sure that what we thought did actually meet that standard as well. But the final point that I did just want to make is around staff engagement and buy-in. I think whenever you do ask staff to do something else on top of their job, you need to make sure that you're engaging with them effectively. And a key thing for us to enable this to be successful was that staff engagement. It's bringing the right people on board early on and making them feel part of that process and making them understand the benefits that they're that we will achieve through the accreditation process. And I don't think that staff engagement and that change management piece can be underestimated as part of this, and engaging with people, but continue engaging with people throughout that process as well. You know, PASA accreditation isn't just a one-off, it's a continual learning process as well. So that was all I was going to cover. Hopefully it's been useful.
Thank you, Amy. So just pick up on a couple of things you both mentioned there. So Mary, you said that the start of your process was a business case. We've also set out that obviously as a commercial organisation, there are different things you might put in there. So a question to Amy is that when you're an in-house operation, what sort of process did you have to go through? Was there a business case? And if so, what sort of thing goes into that?
Yes, we did do a similar process in terms of producing a business case for that. So we looked at, again, as I mentioned, we looked at what options we had for delivery of this. So the key thing for us was to provide assurance to our kind of key stakeholders around what we wanted to do. So we looked at the benefits of each of the different options that we had. So we did go through a business case looking at the costs that were associated with it as well, and aligning those with our kind of long-term corporate strategy as an organisation as well. But our senior management team were very much bought into this quite early on. So it wasn't a hard sell for us. We saw the benefits quite clearly quite early on that we were going to get from this PASA accreditation. So the business case wasn't a hard sell for us, and we've seen benefits in terms of our engagement with our wider stakeholders and our governing bodies around why we're doing this and what we can see from it as well.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on your recruitment point in a minute, but we've got another question in from the audience, so thank you, Chris, this time. And it's specifically aimed at you, Mary. So Chris is interested to know what is the time commitment, and in brackets, personally and the wider XPS project team, across the full accreditation timeline. Was it excessive or was it manageable against your BAU responsibilities? Thank you for the longest question I think I've ever had on.
I'll give it. No, I'll try and give it really short. I know it. So I actually volunteered to be part of the group to help with the PASA accreditation because it's something that means quite a lot to me as a business leader. So it wasn't too onerous. We met up initially to go through the standards, to divvy them out and share them out between us. It wasn't a particularly long meeting. And then after that, we met up every couple of weeks just to say if we'd got more evidence. We put them all in a folder, we went through it, somebody would verify it independently for us to make sure it was there. I think more of the work probably fell on our risk and compliance team because they tend to do more of the auditing processes. But for me as an individual, it wasn't too onerous. It was interesting to read the standards and see how we met them. And also for our staff, it's like a site visit where they know that they're going to spend 20 minutes, half an hour speaking to someone about something or showing something. So we didn't feel it was a particularly massive commitment of time for what we did.
Okay, and just to pivot that back to Amy a minute, we talked earlier, or Lorraine talked earlier about the process, mostly takes like 4 to 6 months. But you mentioned earlier that in terms of the preparation you had to do, it was more like 12 months for you. So sort of similar question, what was the sort of resource hungriness during that year for you, Amy?
I think the accreditation process, when you engage for a point to go through it, is that 4 to 6 months. I think we allowed ourselves a kind of 12-month lead-in time because we are aware that resources we are using to do this are doing the BAU jobs on top of it as well. So we kind of planned that through in terms of that timescale. So it might seem quite a long process, but we just did it from a business perspective, looking at what else we had to deliver during that period, and just made sure that we gave ourselves enough time to do it. I think it probably will vary by organisation in terms of how much time it will take, but I think we kind of set out and looked at it, not in the sense of because we had lots of gaps to fill, but more sense we just wanted to make sure that we had a measured approach and we weren't rushing ourselves, so that when we engaged with that process into accreditation, that was as smooth and as quick as possible at the end of it as well.
Okay, thank you. I did say I was going to come back on the recruitment point, Amy. Do you find that if people are actually looking for roles at organisations like yours, and indeed yours, Mary, are they Googling this sort of stuff? Is it something that new recruits who've not maybe worked in the industry before care about or target?
From our perspective, we have seen that. We have seen when we've had applicants come to the organisation that when they ask us questions, as part of that interview process, it has come up as we recognise. We've seen that you've got your PASA accreditation standards. Can you tell us more about it? Can you understand what you've done to achieve that? What makes you best? What is best standard about what you do to be able to achieve that standard? So we're seeing it that people are using it as a way to find out more about us and understand how we operate, to make sure that we're the right organisation for them. But again, for us as well, it helps us test those candidates. If they do raise those kind of questions, they are the right kind of people that want to come for us as an organisation. It doesn't happen at every single interview, but we have definitely seen that happen since we've had the accreditation.
Yeah, we have as well, similar story. So especially with our apprenticeship intake, they like to do a lot of research, so they are the ones that do tend to go on the website and see things and are able to ask us about it and have done research. And again, with more senior hires, they know that they're going to a company that has good standards and believes in them.
Very good. And just before we ask Lorraine and Angela to come back for the more general Q&A, I'm just going to pick up a question we had at the live event, Mary. So for those of you on the webinar, we did this as a live event a couple of months ago. So the only difference between that live event and this webinar event is that if you want wine afterwards, you have to go to your own fridge for this. But one of the questions you were asked at the time, Mary, I think we'll bring it back up again here because I think it touches on something you said earlier when you were presenting. Just well, back in the live event, this was an anonymous question. There seems to be more and more scrutiny of TPAs through questionnaires, internal audits from the clients. So how has it helped XPS to have this accreditation? Has it helped reduce the scrutiny, or has it helped you do the responses quicker?
It helps with the scrutiny, of course, because people, it's another accreditation that's well regarded in the industry. So we find clients, trustees, they're all aware of it. So for us, it helps us prove our standards and where we're coming from and what we're doing and how we achieve what we do. So for us, it helps answering those questions a lot easier.
Thank you. So if I could invite Lorraine and Angela to come back on, and then we'll see if there's any more questions. So if you've got any burning questions, please do keep on adding them into the chat. Again, just to give you a little bit of time, I'm going to pick up some questions that we had from our live event. I've clicked on the wrong one, so I'm going to try and remember what it was. So one of the questions we have, this might be for you, Lorraine or Angela, the standards, and you mentioned it on this call as well, Lorraine, that the standards are outcomes based. So maybe you could just reiterate what we mean by outcomes based.
Well, it isn't an assessment of, you know, what you've got in place. It's an assessment also of, does it actually work the way it should? And that's where Angela and her team, you know, look for evidence to demonstrate that it does work and it does deliver what it's supposed to deliver. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Angela.
Yeah, I mean, it is also about what is it you do when, so for example, we spoke about the reporting and how is that communicated, what information are you giving to trustees and the employers. It's not just about producing the report and leaving that report there, and the outcome of that report being written is what happens with it, where does it go to, and is there any kind of feedback that comes from that report from trustees, from members, etc. The outcomes vary as well. They vary by organisation and how they can demonstrate what the outcome is. Some of it's written, some of it can be verbal, but it's how you capture that verbal information as well.
And with the feedback, you know, if you get feedback, what do you do with it? Do you analyse it? Do you look for themes? Do you look for trends? And then when you've got that information, how do you use that to improve your services?
Thank you. Couple more questions live now. So from Claire, thank you, Claire. At what point is it best to contact RSM to agree rough timings for the process? For example, should we only contact them to discuss this once we believe we're 100% ready to submit our response and evidence?
I'll take that one. If you feel that you're going to be ready, say within the next 6 months, contact us now. What we ask is to be able to resource it appropriately and be able to give it the attention it deserves, is to be given as much notice as possible. If you think it's going to be in 12 months, then 6 months in advance is perfect. Some organisations can turn the questionnaire around pretty quickly, and they'll say we'll be ready in 3 months. So we can agree those rough timings at the initial call, and then we just keep in touch to make sure that they're still feasible.
There's nothing to stop people having that initial discussion at any point in time. It's up to you. Organisations are in control of when they want to go through this process and submit information, but the initial discussion can happen at any time at all. There's no time limit imposed by us.
And presumably it's useful to have that early chat, because you might have a question like, what does good evidence actually look like?
Yes, we can answer any questions at all during that discussion, and that will help feed into the process of going away and making plans and so on.
Excellent. I believe I have a question from one of our newest PASA directors. So good afternoon, Dan. So this is a question that I'm assuming aimed at Mary and Amy. So we'll start with Mary. If you could go back, what would you do differently in your PASA accreditation journey?
This reaccreditation is a lot easier for us because we've already got the structures in place. We know what we're doing. We've already been gathering our evidence as we've gone along. So I think that's the biggest thing, is the first time you're looking at those standards, it is at that point going, right, what evidence do we need? Whereas I think when you're starting your discussions, it might be sensible to start putting some of your evidence into folders and bits and pieces so that you can go through it and get it, because it is the biggest job really, is proving that you meet those standards. So so that's what my advice would be, is start putting things that you think might be relevant into a folder now to start streaming through that.
Excellent. Amy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think for me, it's making this process part of your BAU very early on. And as part of that, I think when we went through the main accreditation, I think when we went to re-accreditation, we realised that that evidence gathering and that review of where we are with things needed to be done on a more regular basis rather than just at that annual point. So similar to Mary's sense, I think it's just building it into your BA activities, whether it's 6 monthly, quarterly, of just gathering some of that evidence and just checking yourself back against the standards.
And while we're thinking about things like re-accreditation, and we mentioned annual assessments earlier in this call, we also talked about the fact that we don't fail anybody, but we might recommend improvements. So if you do recommend an improvement, Lorraine or Angela, how long do schemes get to implement them? Is there a timeline, or how do improvements play forward into getting accredited?
Effectively, it's a 3-year timeline, because when we do make suggestions for improvements, we like to see them in place by the time the re-accreditation process comes round. I mean, obviously, you know, the sooner people can do it, the better. But certainly when we get to the next, the re-accreditation process, we do look back at what recommendations have been made earlier, and then Angela and her team look to see what's been done.
And we do ask that question during the annual certification around the improvements, and generally most organisations will give responses, and if the improvement has been implemented, they provide that documentation at the time. So it's all about, yeah, that 3-year lead up, and then what we do is do the sample selections or testing at that point in time in the 3 years.
And going back to our live event back in September, we were asked a couple of questions about people who have outsourced their administration. So can the scheme or the trustees themselves get any form of accreditation, or does it have to be the administration team themselves?
No, trustee bodies can certainly apply for accreditation for their schemes. So if they've outsourced their administration, Angela and her team will look at the services that are delivered in support of that particular scheme. It's not accrediting the administrator, the outsourced administrator, it's accrediting the scheme and how the trustees manage and monitor all of that service delivery for their own scheme. We do have trustees accredited.
Thank you. Just last reminder, if you get your questions in, we've got time for a couple more, I think. Let me just a quick scroll through. Yes, so under the people part of the standards, do we expect administrators to be qualified in administration, actually the individual administrators?
Professional qualifications are taken into account during the assessment process, because it's part of that overall development of individuals and maintaining the standards and so on. It's not an absolute requirement. There are a lot of administrators out there who've been doing the job very successfully for a lot of years who don't have a qualification. But for new people coming in, it's certainly a great help to get people up to speed quickly and to achieve that a level of competency necessary to do the job. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Angela.
Yeah, and I mean, when we have the discussions, the one-to-one discussions, we look at people of all levels. So there is no specific level that we would look at, and it's excuse me, it's interesting to talk to those going through the qualifications, because that adds an extra layer to, you know, the dedication that they have to get those qualifications and for the organisation that they're working for. So all we ask is, excuse me, all we ask is that whoever's involved in the one-to-one discussions has sort of around 6 to 12 months working for the organisation, so that we can get an all-round view of their experience of working with that particular organisation. I'm using that word a lot.
Maybe the last one from me then, give the audience a bit more time to ask their most burning final question. In the spirit of this too shall change, how are we looking at accreditation? How are we looking at the standards? How often are we doing that? Things seem to be changing overnight. A bit of cyber, a bit of AI, all of those other buzzwords we haven't mentioned already today. So how do we approach keeping this live?
The Standards Committee are responsible for reviewing the standards. That's their job. But of course, the Accreditation Committee is responsible for assessing organisations against the standards. So we do work closely with the Standards Committee as well. So whenever they're looking at updating standards, we are informed quickly of that, so that we can then see how we need to tweak the accreditation process and make the adjustments. We do give people warning of this, so we don't suddenly jump on organisations and say we've changed everything. There is a lead-in time that we always agree to this, but essentially the Standards Association, I think they look at them about 4 times a year. We have a minimum of 1 joint meeting a year, but as you rightly say, there's been a lot of change recently, so there's been a lot of dialogue toing and froing between us more recently as well. It's a moving target. It's, you know, we have to be aware of what's happening in the industry, changes in regulation and so on, and make sure that we're on the ball.
Excellent. Well, I think we all wrap that up there. Thank you very much. So thanks for your attention today. For those of you in the audience, please let us know if this sort of webinar is useful to you. Please feedback any way you can. And just as I'm wrapping up, maybe you can have a think about whether your name alongside these accredited members' names here would look great. What does that mean for your organisation if it to show off that you have been independently accredited to say, this is what good looks like? And that's why we set this as the gold standard for administration. So thank you to my colleagues on the call today. You've seen Mary from XPS talk about her journey, Lorraine from our accreditation committee, Angela from RSM, who's our independent auditor, and you almost saw Amy from West Midlands. We missed you, Amy. You've also missed Donna. So Donna works on the standards committee. She presented when we did the live event. She unfortunately wasn't available today, but thanks for Lorraine for carrying her materials today. And behind the scenes, we've got all sorts of team from PASA helping this event actually run. So my thanks to them for making this all work. So thanks for coming. If you're interested in becoming accredited, you'll find all sorts of information on our website to get hold of us and start your journey. And as I said, let us know if these events are worth your attention over lunchtime, and what we can do to improve. We are a learning organisation alongside everyone else. So with that, I'll bid you a very good afternoon, and thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.